Welcome to the Construction Disruption Podcast, where we uncover the future of design, building, and remodeling.
I'm Todd Miller of Isaiah Industries, manufacturer of specialty metal roofing and other building materials. And today my co-host is Mr. Scott Clifton. How are you doing, Scott?
I'm doing very well, Todd. Thanks for asking.
Great. Well, this is your first time on the podcast. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. It is
Cool.
The first time. Yeah.
So Scott is one of our territory managers. He works with our customers, in a huge part of the eastern United States, right?
My car points east, so every time I get on the road, I feel like I'm going home. I love it.
That's cool because he lives here in Columbus, Ohio, but his roots are on the East Coast in PA and New Jersey and points north as well. So, thank you. Look forward to having you here. This is great to have you with me today. So. As a reminder to our audience, we are doing our challenge words. So each Scott and I, and also our guest, have been given a challenge word by one of the others that we are going to try our best to work into the conversation as seamlessly as possible without you knowing it, you meaning the audience. But then at the end of the show, we'll tell you whether we were successful. Sometimes we're not. Usually we are. And sometimes I'll see a few people are like overachievers. They'll work theirs in like 2 or 3 or 4 times, but we'll see where it goes. So, Scott, you ready to go?
I am ready, sir.
Fantastic. Well, I am excited about today's guest. Today's guest is Ken Gosnell. Hailing from Lakeland, Florida, Ken is a business and executive coach, and he is the founder of CEO Experience. While Ken works to influence leaders today, he credits his own father for a huge impact that his dad had on his life. Here's a quick story that Ken tells that I really think summarizes who Ken is and what he cares about. So this is Ken's words. When I was 10 years old growing up in the Midwest, I remember having a conversation with my father. My dad always took 2 things to work every day. He would get his hard hat and his Bible. One day I asked Dad why he took his Bible to work. He said that the Bible helped him and he wanted to read it during his breaks. Those 2 items that my father introduced me to have shaped my life and my work. So that kind of gives you a flavor. Ken's dad was probably in the construction industry. But today, Ken exists to help faith-driven CEOs to hear the words, "Well done, good and faithful servants," as they lead their businesses to have a kingdom impact and live their own lives and leave behind a legacy of success. Ken, welcome to Construction Disruption. It's a pleasure to have you with us here today.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, let's dig right into things. So, it sounds like your father had a huge impact on you. Tell us a little bit more about maybe your growing up years, your faith journey, what brought you to where you are today.
Absolutely. So my journey started in the Midwest, as I mentioned. I grew up in Missouri, and my grandfather actually worked in a factory in St. Louis, and he had the dream to own a farm one day. And so he moved out to the middle of Missouri and started working a road crew for work as he continued to work to buy the farm. And eventually he was actually ran over by a drunk driver when my father was 15 years old. And so my dad started to take over the leadership role of his family, and he raised his 5 brothers and sisters because back in those days in the 1950s, they didn't have a lot of things to support families during that difficult time. So my dad got into the construction business and continued to work as a carpenter and then many other different construction industries. But his leadership really began to shape a lot of my life. And like I mentioned, or you mentioned, when I was 10, I'd always see my dad take 2 things to work, his hard hat and his Bible. And those 2 things really helped me to understand kind of the key values of what it meant to live a good life and to lead a great business. It takes hard work, but it also takes values and principles that should guide that. And so as I got older and began to really dive into that, I understood that the Bible, who was such a guiding point for my father through all of his life, helped him to overcome difficulties and as well as it helped me to overcome difficulties, really had the clues on how to build a great business. And so what I teach today is that well done principles. There are 12 principles that leaders should use to grow their business. And as they do that with these principles, they can also have an impact on the kingdom of God. And so I call them biblical business principles. And so I work with CEOs and business owners, mostly privately held small businesses, a lot in the construction industry, to help them to think about how to hire the right people, how to build their organization, how to set vision and strategy, how to deal with their customers in an effective way. So it's been quite a journey, but it's been a delightful one.
Very, very neat. Well, so I'm going to ask you, put you on the spot here. Give us a clue. What are a couple of those principles? Maybe not give us the full rundown, but curious what a couple of those are to give the audience sort of an idea of where you go with this.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of my favorites is one of them is called Know Your Order, Work Your Order. Jesus made a statement to his disciples and to his followers where he said, "Seek first my kingdom and my righteousness, and all these things will be given unto you." And what I understood as I started to look at life and business was every good thing has an order. There's a first, and there's a second, and there's a third. Unfortunately, sometimes in my life and sometimes in my business or sometimes in the businesses that I help, we get things out of order. And I often even hearken back to how God created the world. You know, it says this in Genesis chapter 1 that on the first day, he created the heavens and the earth. And then the second day he created, the third day he created, the fourth day. After every day, he said, "It is good." And I recognized God's wisdom over my wisdom immediately, because if it was me, you know, if I had the power, unlimited power to do everything, I would have created everything in one day. I mean, why am I waiting 6 days to do things in one, I can do in one day? Or maybe I would have created man first, because, here's the crowning creation, right? This is the person that's made in the image of God. And yet God waited till day 6 in order to create the best thing. Well, what that teaches us is God's wisdom is smarter a lot of times than our wisdom, is that we need an order to things. We need a first, we need a second. In the construction industry, we know this. You can't put up walls until you have a foundation. You can't put up roof until you have a walls. There's an order to things, and the best businesses and the best life, they understand what their order is and they work that order. So that's one of the principles as an example that I like to talk about.
I love that.
I'm curious about, have you seen what's a common misordering that a CEO or a leader would have?
Well, I think the biggest misordering is that we give everything to our business and we forget our spiritual life or our family, and we leave that in the background. There's been so many business leaders that have come to me, or people that I've experienced in my life, that they built a great business and they did a wonderful thing, but they sometimes did that at the detriment of their family. And I remind them, and even back to that Genesis account, that Adam had great work to do, right? He was put in the garden to take care of it. He was to name all the animals. That was godly work. That was great work that Adam was supposed to do. And yet God never called Adam to be one with his work. He called him to be one with his spouse, with Eve, when she came in. He made the two one and created the institution of marriage. And so, I tell business leaders, if you build a great business, but you've broken your family in the process, you're not going to hear the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." From a practical business side, I think one of the things that sometimes we get out of order is we focus on maybe production and we forget people. And so whether that's listening to the customer and understanding what the customer wants, or maybe taking care of our employees and helping them to understand that we value them not just for what they do, but for who they are. So those are a couple different orders that sometimes we have to reorganize, or we have to put back in place to make sure that we're doing things the way that it's really going to benefit our businesses and going to benefit our lives.
Excellent. Thank you.
Very interesting. So you founded CEO Experience 15, 16 years ago. Tell us a little bit about what was your career before CEO Experience, and what really made you realize that, hey, there's a need for this, and God's calling me to this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was working with a large consulting organization helping build bigger businesses back 20 some years ago, and traveling around the world. And then after 9/11, I went to Washington, D.C. and did some work with the government. The government at that time, President Bush had an initiative to help businesses or a government run more like a business, kind of some of the things that we're even hearing the last few days. And so they really welcomed a lot of business people in to help top leaders in the government to think more business minded and so on and so forth. So I moved to Washington, D.C. for a short period of time after that. And I wanted to still stay in the business world. And so I was looking for a group of Christian businessmen or CEOs to still do life with during this short stint that I was going to be in the government. And I looked around all of Washington, D.C., and I couldn't find anybody that was leading or working with Christian CEOs and business owners. And so after I left the government, after my short time there, I decided God put a kind of place to call. It was kind of a beautiful thing that happened. God gave me this vision, and my wife gave me an ultimatum. She said, back to my number one customer, which is my spouse. I always say to our business owners, hey, understand your spouse is your number one customer. Hopefully you'll keep that customer for 50 years or more, right? You don't typically do that with your business. And she said, well, you travel too much. You're gone too much. And we were having our third child at the time. And so she said, I need you to stay home, Buster. You need to not be gone as much. And so God kind of brought all that together. And I said, what would it look like if I founded an organization that I could pour into the lives of Christian CEOs and business owners and help them build a great business, but also do it for the kingdom of God? And so that's how CEO Experience began. We kind of took a step of faith, as we do in all businesses. And I told some of my advisors at the time, I said, well, I'm looking for a group of about 15 Christian CEOs. Do you know anybody? And their response was, I don't think there are 15 Christian CEOs in Washington, D.C. And but you know how God does amazing things. We ended up finding 15 CEOs the first month that I launched that business, and some of those CEOs are still with me some 20 years later. So God has done a great thing, and we've been very pleased and honored with what He's done.
Wow. So when someone comes to you, a CEO comes to you, and they're thinking of becoming a client, and they're looking at, what you have to offer, what is it that they're really seeking? I mean, is there something that they're feeling missing, that they're really seeking to achieve or accomplish or learn or grow in?
Yeah, I mean, they come from a variety. Some want to grow their businesses and they want to really expand. Some of them may be going through some personal challenges where they want a trusted advisor. But the thing that I find or I hear most often is that most of the CEOs or leaders that come, they really want to be in oneness. And what I mean by that is that they often find themselves fragmented, and I did too in my previous life in many ways, that, there was the business Ken, and, those guys knew me, and individuals, they trusted my business acumen and my business wisdom. And then there was the spiritual Ken, when I go to my church and be around my pastor and my small group or whatever. And those people loved me, but they didn't really understand my business side. And my business side didn't really understand my spiritual side. And then there was the personal Ken, and maybe my neighbors and my friends. And what I endeavored to start was a place where they could bring their whole self to it. And so we're going to talk business, but equally as important is sometimes what's going on in our spiritual life. And we have people that come and they share struggles that they're having in their spiritual life, or maybe they're trying to formate disciplines or grow in their faith. And then they also bring their personal life, and we wrestle with, we see ourselves as a partner with them in the business and in their life. And so nothing is off the table. We tell them that we're going to ask them questions that everybody else is afraid to ask them. But in so doing, we believe that because they have certain gifts, talents, abilities, and experiences, that they're going to be able to fulfill their calling with the partnership. The way we like to describe it, since you guys understand a little bit, there's a great story in the Bible where King David had a sin with Bathsheba. And King David was a great leader and accomplished great feats for his kingdom and for God's kingdom. And one day he becomes tempted by a woman, and he gives into that temptation. And all of a sudden it starts a series of bad choices and bad decisions. He tries to hide it up, and he tries to murder Uriah and kills her husband. And then he tries to hide from it and ignore it for a long time. And there's one guy that comes to him, and it's a guy named Nathan. And Nathan wasn't a warrior that was on the battlefield with David. Nathan was a spiritual advisor that had been put in David's life. And what I recognized in my life is I needed that one person, or those leaders that knew the whole person. They knew all of me. And, I believe Nathan was there, and probably all throughout David's life, when David won victories in battles, he was probably the one in the palace that whispered in David's ear, hey, don't forget, you may be great, but it was God's strength that gave you victory today. Or maybe it was Nathan that was there whispering in David's ear after a defeat and say, hey, don't forget, I know you're defeated today, but God still has a calling on your life. But we do know that it was Nathan for sure that went to David and said, hey, you're the man. You've got some things to clean up to be the man that God has called you to be. And that's what we endeavor to do in the lives of the business leaders that we partner. We want to build great businesses, but more than that, we want to build them to a life that they can hear the words, well done, in every aspect of their life and then for all eternity.
Sounds like, Ken, you really keep your clients grounded and not like pie in the sky or flowers in the sky, but really just keep them grounded through those experiences. Has there been, I'm just curious, in those conversations you've had, has there been a time where it's been just a real challenge to coach one of your CEOs and keep them focused on what's actually true in the situation?
Yeah, sure. Every day. Leaders, we're a lot of times we have big visions and we like to chase the greatest trend, or, we think everybody else has the problem and we don't have the problem. Right. And so I have great guys, and I have great coaches. I have a team of coaches that work using our content and our materials all over the country, and mostly on the East Coast, but we have some out West as well. But yeah, I think every day is a challenge in business. Every day is a challenge in life. Markets change. If you have team members and employees, they bring problems into the workplace. And so, we have great leaders, but it's still, we have to keep them focused. And I go back to that principle. I've got to remind them, hey, know your order, work your order. There is a certain thing that God has asked you to do right now. And you may want to do 1,000 things. You may want to do 100 things. But that one thing that God is asking you to do, and it may not even make sense to you, but that one thing that you've been asked to do, that's the most critical things for you to do now. And we're going to try to help to keep you accountable. Another principle I teach them is, I call it make the move from owner to overseer. And the idea is to become not an owner of our businesses, but to be a steward of our businesses. And that comes out of that parable that Jesus told about the leader that went away, and he had 3 employees that he appointed and gave different talents. And he comes back and he says to the 2 of them that produced great work, well done, good and faithful servant. The 3rd employee, the 3rd guy, he got distracted, right? He put his talent in the ground, and then he went about his work. I'm sure he was still working, but he wasn't working at the thing that the master had told him to work at. And so when the master comes back, what's the master say? He says, hey, you wicked and lazy servant, you didn't do what I asked you to do. You buried it, but you didn't even put it in the right place. You could have put it in the bank, got me a little bit of interest. So depart from me. He said, but you're wicked and lazy. You didn't do what I asked you to do. You didn't stay focused. You didn't fulfill the calling of our life. And I think about that so powerfully, right? Isn't it life too short and business too hard not to hear the words, well done? We've got to stay focused on what God has asked us to do, the single most important thing that day or that week or that month or that year. So we better have some pretty good clarity around it. One of the things I like to tell leaders is I say, when the leader becomes clear, everybody and everything in the organization becomes clear. And that's so true in project management. That's why we have blueprints, right? Because it makes for clarity purposes. That's why we have surveys. That's why we go out and we spend so much time making sure that we can do what we think the vision is that we're supposed to do. But we better have that clarity. The moment we lose that clarity, we start to lose ourselves.
Very interesting. Wow. I love that idea too of being the Nathan, pointing people back to what's important. Well, I read on your website that CEO Experience works through personal, peer, and strategy retreats. Can you tell us a little bit about each of those formats and how they work and what impact they have?
Absolutely. So, when I thought about creating this business, again, I believe that God's wisdom is better than my wisdom. And so I tried to look how Jesus learned or how he taught other people. And I actually found that there were 7 different ways that Jesus interacted with people throughout the gospel account. One of those was with his peers. He would go in and he'd debate with the Pharisees about a particular idea or concept or a passage of scripture. And so one of the things we use the word retreat because we want leaders to understand they're not in control, that they need to get away, just like Jesus did, to have some time to get some clarity in their mind and in their thinking. So I use the word retreat for the different methodologies that we have. So that's a peer retreat, if you will, when we get together and we can wrestle with usually about 15 other CEOs or business owners, maybe from a variety of different businesses, but there's a topic for us to talk about. There's some problems for us to solve. There's a biblical business principle for us to discern about. We also have private retreats, which is more of executive coaching. It's one-on-ones with the individual CEOs or business owners. And you might be in a peer retreat, but you also might have private coaching. You might have private coaching and not be in a peer retreat, if you will. You might have your own private time. They all get the executive guide. So every month we produce a CXP CEO guide, and we use the word guide. It's one part journal, it's one part business magazine, it's one part Bible devotion or Bible biblical application, because we talk about the business piece of it. So we actually want them to have 2 retreats. That's part of another principle that we have, which is always take the second step. It's a little bit going the second mile. So you'll have your primary retreat, but then you'll have a personal retreat by yourself where you can get that guide and walk through and see what God might be revealing to you. We also have what we call team retreats, and that's where we challenge leaders to work with their own team members, but sometimes in certain situations, leaders aren't able to do that. And so we provide that option of coming in, and maybe it's a lunch and learn type of a model, or maybe it's personal coaching with a few team members, key select group, like general managers or vice presidents, where we can help them stay on page with the business owner about different topics, and we're expanding that business acumen. We also have what we call perspective retreats, and those are once a quarter. And so people can come together, and that's usually developing a strategic plan, and we call them master plans. And so we have a different variety of, because we tried to start, one of the things that was important to me is I looked at some groups after I found that there were some people moving in this space, but what it seemed to be was very fragmented. And what I mean by that is they had kind of one option for a business owner. And so maybe I have a peer retreat that I could go to, but maybe I didn't have anything else for my team, or I don't have it for me personally. And so if I don't fit that option, then I really can't work with that organization. Our mission is to help people hear the words well done. And so we believe in a Philippians 2:4 model that says that Jesus did not consider equality with God, but considered others more important than himself. And he came to this earth to die on a cross so that we might be saved. And it said we should have the same attitude of Christ, who considered others more important than himself. And so we start with the CEO. We say, hey, we want to partner with you for potentially the rest of your life. And it doesn't matter what option you choose, which retreat option you choose. We'll move in and out as what you need and what's in the best interest of your business. But our retreats are fun. We laugh together. We poke fun at each other. We keep each other accountable. We challenge each other. But we do want to grow in our business wisdom because we're thinking of ourselves as stewards of our business, not just owners of it.
Seems like the folks who are on those retreats would certainly build interpersonal relationships that extend beyond just the retreat too, I would imagine.
They very much do. They still, even sometimes I've had people sell their business, but they still will be, call one another throughout the month or go get coffee, or they'll we develop these lifelong relationships with one another, which I just think is the way that it's designed. Another principle we have is we always will say our relationship in Christ will always supersede our business relationship. And so what that means is that we invite, even if you go sell your business and you're not a part of our groups any longer, we still invite you to come back once a year to a retreat. We still have interactions. We can still pray for you. We welcome back people that have been with us for a long time because they're still contributing, they're still adding value. And so it really becomes more like a family than anything else, which I'm real proud about.
So it sounds like with you having different, leaders and coaches scattered around. So are these retreats sort of geographically centered? You generally be with folks, who may be from a couple 100-mile radius. Is that kind of the way it would work?
Yeah, we have 3 different types that's available. So one is local. We have different coaches that offer retreats in their local areas. So it might be around a city. So I have one in Lakeland as an example. I still fly back to Baltimore once a month because my guys wouldn't let me go even though I moved from there. And so, which is wonderful. And I love to do that. So that's not a problem. But it is geographical. It is also what we call our circle of influence. So with our coaches, for me as an example and other coaches that we work with, I had a network all over the country. And so in that aspect, I might have a retreat in Phoenix, Arizona a couple times a year. It might be one of my prospective retreats, and I go out there and just visit them during that particular time, or maybe they do the private retreat. So it's because they've connected to me and they know me and they're in my circle of influence. And then we do have virtual retreats as well. So virtual retreats allow us to bring in people from different parts. We allow our retreats to go up to 15 CEOs or business leaders, and then we cut it off because we need to have kind of that group that can work together. And in our membership, our model, they get to select the new members as well. So we'll have a guest that comes in, but the current members will only be able to give the ability for another person to join that group because they have to feel that connection with each other as they walk together. And so it's as much their group as it is the coach's group or my group. And so we enjoy that, and they enjoy that as well because they really do. They're able to find other people that they can really connect to. And again, it might be from a variety of different businesses size. We look at a variety of different businesses. We kind of look at Jesus's model of how he called the disciples. And I look at 4 groups of people that join our peer retreats usually. The first 4 disciples were fishermen, and they were all in the same industry, the same business, Andrew, James, John. And so I call those Main Street businesses. They're really usually direct to the customer. It might be your landscaper or your roofer or a construction business, somebody that's really taking care of a customer or home issue. The second set of disciples were Nathaniel and Thaddeus, and they were more questioning. We don't know a lot about them, but we know a few Thomas. There were a few times in Jesus's ministry that they questioned Jesus. And so I say those are more thought-minded businesses. They're usually business-to-business models. They might be an IT company or something that's solving a problem for a business specifically. And then the third set is what I call consultants. And, Jude was in that group and he was very, and James, they were very direct and they were very to the point, and they probably had expertise in one specific area. And so we may have our last for the next 4 is really a group of consultants. And so it might be a sales consultant, might be an EOS consultant, it might be some operations consultant. There's a lot of different accountant as a consultant, a financial planner, they own a financial group. And then the last 4 is what I call mission-minded businesses. And that 4 should be included as well because after the new disciple, after Judas left, he calls Thaddeus, but they were on mission at that point. And so these are a lot of nonprofits, maybe pastors of larger churches that want to be a part. But when you get a group together like that in a room where you have a wide variety of business and business acumen and business experience, man, it just blows your socks off because you get the wisdom from the individual, but you also get the wisdom from the industry. And what may be normal in my industry can be innovative in somebody else's industry, right? All of a sudden they start sharing something and it's a brand new idea that really helps my business to take off. So that is the types of group, but it comes down to could be virtual, it could be in person, or it could be in your circle of influence.
Very good. Well, you've been pretty prolific. You have a lot of content and resources out there between podcasts and books you've written and other online content. And I realize now you have content that you develop specifically for members, your clients of CEO Experience. But can you kind of give us an overview of the content that is out there that someone can tap into at any time?
Well, we're real proud of our content. Like I said, we produce the CXP CEO Guide every month. And one of our commitments to our members is that we'll never repeat an executive guide. And so we now have over 80 executive guides, and those are about 50-page booklets or guides that business owners can use on a variety of different topics. And that's because, I believed in the Bible, and the Bible talks about preaching the full counsel of the Word of God. And the Bible is so rich and so full; it's so applicable to everything that's going on in our world. Our guides, we want it to also be timely and what we call timeless. So the biblical business principle is timeless, but a lot of times what's happening in the marketplace can be very timely, and we need to have that discussion. That really showed itself during COVID as an example, right? So, all of a sudden, some of the other organizations, and I love anybody that's out there doing anything for God's kingdom, but, they had a static kind of curriculum or content or maybe speakers that were coming in to speak in their groups, but it had nothing to do what was really happening in the world when businesses were shutting down and everything was being, it was a totally different world. Well, we were able to respond in a timely way. We were able to talk about crisis management plans and doing remote work and how to handle customer issues when, you're shutting business down. And right now, for example, this month, we just released our CEO guide. We're looking at understanding your prime gross margin percentage, right? As costs rise in the marketplace, understanding how to look at your margins and understand. But, so all that stuff is new, and we believe that our guides are going to be valuable. But really, we understand that in many ways it's just like toilet paper compared to the Bible, right? I mean, the Bible is timeless. And I love those principles because that's what really lasts, right? It worked 2,000 years ago. It works today. And the principles that really guide and should shape every one of our business concepts, they'll work 2,000 years in the future. And so it doesn't matter. We had a technology guide recently. We were talking about AI and how AI is impacted, which is great conversations. But if you don't understand the biblical foundation of it, you're really just trashing through, the latest concepts or ideas. The biblical concepts are really what's going to shape your decisions in every new change that's happening in the marketplace.
I'm kind of curious. So, I think that most, people who are trying to live out their faith through their business, at some point have hit a point where they realize, I can't silo these things. I can't keep my faith over. And you touched on it earlier, faith and silo your family and your friends and silo your business. But I think a lot of us, are seeking that wholeness. So we find that, we can't silo those anymore. Most of your clients, I'm curious, have they already hit that point where they're saying, no, I've brought these things together? Or are they kind of still working through that process? Or maybe it's a process that never ends when it gets right down to it.
Well, it is a process that never ends. I talk about the biblical business principles or something that we should continue to grow in and know, but we'll never master, right? Like I can live the rest of my life and work on becoming a steward of my business and not the owner of it and letting go of control or figuring out a second mile. But no, and this was a mission that I was on because I do find it's easy to silo things and I would go through my entire business day. And even though I was a good Christian per se, I wasn't doing anything unethical or immoral. I could spend the entire day and not think about Jesus or not think about God or what God's wanting me to do. So part of our mission is we believe if we bring those biblical business principles in, we recognize that leaders make decisions all throughout the day. they've got a multitude of decisions. And so these are really decision-making principles that will help you to think about God's principle and bring those into your life and into your business. But it is a journey. I remember one of the guys that I worked with in DC, he recently sold his business, but his name was Joe. He was in a distribution business for wood finishes. And so he worked with cabinet makers and builders and so on and so forth. He had this beautiful showroom in Washington, D.C. And when he came to me, he said, Ken, I want to finish well. I'd like for you to help me sell the business, but I'd also like to know more of God and God's word. And I'd like to figure out how to apply that more to my business. And I said, I think we can work with you. I said, if you're willing to take some steps of faith and believe in asking the impossible, do some things that might seem crazy at times. And he said he was. And so one of the things we started to pray about was he had this beautiful showroom. So he told me, he said, hey, Ken, nobody in my business is a Christian. He was in business for 30 years. He said, at that point, he said, I've never met a Christian, never had an employee that was a Christian. And he said, I've often wondered why God put me in this God-forsaken business, right? Because, I'd like at least to have another Christian around. I'm partly hiring you because you're at least a Christian. I can talk to you about my faith. I said, Joe, I think you're asking the right question, but you're asking the wrong way, right? You're asking that as a punishment. Why did God put you in this God-forsaken business? I see it as a mission field. Right? I said, God's putting you in this God-forsaken business because he wants you to be the Christian in this business. And I said, I do challenge you. I think you may not have had any employees that were Christian. That's fine. But I said, probably some of your customers are Christians and some of your vendors are Christians. You just don't know it. And but we started to pray together. And I said, let's pray about how you can, bring God more into your business because you want that. I know you want that oneness. You want to feel like you're hearing the words, well done. And I said, it doesn't have to be something big. It can be something small. And so I challenged him to pray for 30 days and we prayed together. And finally, one day he calls me. He said, Ken, guess what? I've got it. I got it. And I said, got what? And he said, I got what I'm going to do. And I said, all right, this is great. Let me hear it. He said, God's been revealing to me, I've got this beautiful showroom that all these vendors come in. He said, I should probably put out a couple of Bibles in the showroom, just put them on a little table someplace and give them away for free. And I said, man, that's beautiful. I love that. That's great. I said, so what are you going to do? And he said, I guess I'm going to get some Bibles. I said, well, when are you going to get some Bibles? Because, you got to keep focus, right? And the challenge, he said, well, I guess I can go at lunchtime. Maybe I'll go to the Christian bookstore and buy some Bibles. I said, fantastic. I said, call me when you get them because I want to make accountability, right? Because it's easy to say some things. Another principle that we talk about is know your yeses and nos. Jesus said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. That's a lot of conviction, right, when we start to do that. So anyway, Joe, sure enough, he went off at lunchtime, went to the local Christian bookstore, and he bought 5 gigantic, beautiful leather-bound Schofield study Bibles. These Bibles were, they're thick and they're beautiful, and cost him about $80 a piece or something. He comes, he calls me up and I didn't know what he was going to buy. I didn't know, all that kind of, but I loved it, right? He was believing, but he also didn't, he thought, well, I'll put these 5 Bibles out and they'll sit there for a while because nobody's probably going to, I don't have any Christians, right? So nobody's going to come in. And so he comes back into his showroom, gets a little table and sticks the stack of Bibles on the table and pulls a piece of paper from the counter and gets a permanent marker and writes on the top of it, free Bibles, and sticks that piece of paper on that stack. He goes off into his office, and about 30 minutes later, he comes back into the showroom, and all 5 Bibles are gone, but that paper is still on the table. Well, sure enough, he asked his guy that was in the showroom at the time, a guy named Gio, who wasn't a Christian, by the way, but all of a sudden later, it's a whole other story, but becomes a Christian, which is a beautiful story. But he says, hey, Gio, where did those Bibles go? And Gio said, I don't know. I guess the customers took them or, the employees took them. Somebody took them. And so Joe goes back in the office. He's calling, hey, guess what, Ken? Guess what? I said, what? He said, all 5 Bibles are gone. I said, well done. I just did something for the kingdom of God. And, we almost just started to cry, both of us at that time, because it was so beautiful, right? 30 years in business. About that time, he'd been in business about 32 years. I never done anything for the kingdom of God. And all of a sudden he gave away 5 Bibles. I said, you know what? When you get to heaven, God's not going to worry about your P&Ls, and he's not going to worry about your inventory. He's not going to worry about all that stuff. You know what? He's going to say, well done, because you gave 5 Bibles away through your showroom. And I mean, Joe just, was honored and just so amazed. And I said, 5 Bibles in 30 minutes, huh? And I said, Joe, isn't that amazing? I said, you had 30 years, and now in 30 minutes, you've had 5 Bibles. I said, do you know how many churches in Washington, D.C. haven't given away 5 Bibles in their lifetime? And we laughed at that a little bit. And I'm not against church. I'm obviously for the church. But I just wanted to give him some praise and let him know that what he had done was significant. And then I said, you know what you need to do next, right? And he said, no, what? And I said, you need some more Bibles. Right. And but it's such a beautiful story, because that led to several years of him giving away Bibles. He had a stack. He had ended up with 3 stacks in his showroom. He had a stack of regular Bibles. Now, they weren't all big, comfortable. They were a little smaller, cheaper probably at the time. But then he thought, well, there's probably some people that don't know English real well in our city. And so he had a whole stack of Spanish Bibles. And then he decided a few months after that a lot of these people that might come into the showroom, they might have children. And so he should give away some beautiful children's Bibles. And over the next few years, he gave away thousands of Bibles throughout his showroom. And when he sold his business recently and he retired, he said to me, which is pretty profound, he said, I wish I would have started sooner. He said, of all the things that I did, beautiful. He, provided finishes for the cabinets at the Capitol and, the White House. And just beautiful stuff that him and his team and his people had done. But the thing that he was most proud of was the thing that he'd done for the kingdom of God and the Bibles that he gave away. And, that's well done. And that's what I love. So did we sell his business? Yes. Did he get his money that he wanted for it? Absolutely. Did he train his team and develop them? Yes. But you know what? If he didn't do the well done part of that on the other side, helping his team become Christians and giving away the Bibles, then, he would have really missed it. And he probably would have lived with regret the rest of his life, because he may have had a good bank account, but he wouldn't have heard the words well done for all eternity. So anyway, sorry, I went on a little long about that. I get really passionate.
Well, it's obvious, Ken. And I got to say, well done to you for helping that business owner connect his faith to his business in a very practical way that led to a great impact. So well done. Nice job. And I want to, as you're talking, the question that came to my mind was, is there a rule of life or conduct for the clients you work with? How do you help shape or help them bring to life their faith through their business?
Well, I start with each of them. Again, we go back to the individual. So we take a wide view of faith. I ask them to have 2 strong beliefs. Number one is that they believe that the Bible can be their rule of faith and practice. And so it doesn't necessarily matter what church that they're a part of or where they come from, or maybe they may even not know the Bible. I've had several people that maybe they had a bad faith experience when they were a kid, but all of a sudden they said, wow, I can really believe the Bible. And so, and we don't not only need to believe it, we need to apply it. Right. So James says that it's not good enough just to be hearers of the word, but we need to be doers of it as well. So we have that perspective. And then the second perspective I have is, are they teachable? Are they willing to learn, and are they willing to grow? And do they have a level of humility? The Bible tells us that the wise are humble. The wisdom starts with the fear of God, and that we want to allow God to be able to speak into our lives. And so, if we start in those 2 places, then I start with each of them. And I get to know maybe their faith background and where they're at and what they want to accomplish in their faith. And we'll just continue. And I hope that, like my father, what I really want more than anything is to turn them on to God's word. Because I think it was St. Augustine that said, if we bring people to Jesus, Jesus will bring them right about everything else, right? I kind of have a little different model. If I bring them to the Bible will help shape every other aspect of their life. And as it did for me. And so once they fall in love with the Bible and let the Bible begin to guide them or direct them. So we do get real practical. We get to know their faith story. I believe Ephesians 2:10 that says we're God's workmanship. We've been created to do good works that God's prepared in advance. And so one of the very first things that I do with them is what I call leadership DNA. And I want to understand how God made them. What are they? How, if there are some traits or characteristics that God specifically put them into, because all of a sudden that helps them to understand themselves better as well. And so some of that traits come from their parents, their mother and father. Some of it comes from their experience. Some of it comes from their faith experience as well and their background. And so we really try to start with them individually and then help them to walk out their vision or what we believe and or discover the vision that God has for them.
So I'm kind of curious, backing up a little bit, what does onboarding a new client look like? How do you help them find, okay, where do I fit within the CEO experience?
So we have certain tools. The CEO guide helps with that because we have a set of tools that we believe are good for business and then they're also good for life. And one of the things that, again, I'm proud of is this toolkit that we've developed. It's about a handful of tools. They all come from the Bible. And so it's not just something that Ken created or Ken designed, right? So one is that leadership DNA. Then we also have what we call a focus wheel. Somebody asked Jesus, or one of the Pharisees asked Jesus one time what the greatest commandment was. Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and body. And so what we've done is we've taken those, what I call those 4 leadership quadrants, heart, soul, mind, and body, and we break them out to practical applications. What does that look like in our life as leaders? So heart often speaks to the relationships that we have. Could be relationships with our key team members, our key customers, could be relationship with our spouse or children. And so we give an assessment early on of where are you at on your relationships? How do you feel? How strong do you feel about your relationships? Where might God be asking you to improve? So we're able to develop a roadmap from them based on kind of that area. And then we create a vision for where they would like to go. We believe principle number 7 that I talk about right in the book, Well Done. I talk about believe and ask in the impossible. And it's that bigger vision that God's given to us. You know, I tell leaders, there's so many things that can be done that once seemed impossible because somebody thought it was possible. And you know what's interesting in the Bible, if you read all the spiritual leaders of the Bible, is that God asked them, every one of them, to do an impossible task. Like it was impossible for Moses to go back to Pharaoh and ask for the people to be released. It was impossible for Moses to walk across the Red Sea, right? It was impossible for Joshua to go into the walls of Jericho and just march around and sing songs so that the walls would fall down, or Noah to build an ark, right? Or to Jonah to win the entire city, right? Or David to win against the Goliath, of a man named Goliath, the Philistine, right? So there's these impossible things. And so I challenge them to think and dream what's impossible. Well, great businesses have created impossible things as well, right? All of a sudden, Elon Musk is thinking about how do we live in Mars, as an example, or how does everybody drive a Cybertruck, right? These are impossible things. Steve Jobs did that, and Bill Gates when when computers came into existence. And so, we've got to rediscover that impossibility thinking in our life. And it's not impossibility; it's more of what I call a dream and passion that God's given to us. And so we walk them through that process of kind of where they are, what is God calling them to do and to complete. And then we set up some roadmaps along the way. And then we have these tools that help guide not only them personally, but also the same thing's true for their business as well. We believe that God gave them that business as a platform and as a resource. And so many business owners we find are underutilizing the platform and the resource that God has given to them. And I'll give you just one example about that. We had a CEO guide recently where we were talking about wealth creation. And many people, I said in that guide that, and I wasn't trying to be mean or disrespectful, I'm trying to be honest, but many leaders, and I did it for myself a long time, we don't have any bigger vision than just making our next payroll. So, I mean, we're just staying in business for the next 2 weeks, right? And we're kind of just there. And yet one of the things that God's done consistently throughout the Bible is he helped business leaders build something And maybe for the next generation, maybe for the third generation or fourth generation, he did something in them because he was preparing them for what was next. And so sometimes what that means is, one of the business owners, for example, I challenged them a few years ago before COVID. I said, your business is doing well. Why don't we go buy a building? God's given you this resources. Let's do something to create wealth, right, for you. And so he was able to buy that building, but that building ended up saving him during COVID because he was able to take a loan on the equity that he had, kept his business intact. And so, and I don't look at that as my wisdom. I look at that as God's wisdom, right? So God was giving him a resource that was available to him because he knew what was next when that business owner didn't know that was next. So that's part of the onboarding. It's a systematic process. We believe in know your order, work your order, but we start with where they're at and then try to create the vision of where they'd like to go.
Well, that's great. And I keep thinking back. I loved your story about Joe, was it, who owned the business and started giving away Bibles. And, he's looking at this and saying, gosh, I'm not surrounded by any Christians. And, you helped him see the silver lining in that, this was his mission. And it's funny, a couple of months ago, I found myself talking to my wife and I said, I have hit this point in my life where I am not surrounded by anyone but Christians. And I kind of, and I've kind of pulled myself back and realized, no, that's not really the case. That may have been an excuse. But, it was a reminder that, gosh, we got to be out there in the mission field as well. So, Ken, again, well done. This has been great. Beautiful stories. Great time talking with you. We're close to wrapping up what we call the business end of things. Is there anything we haven't covered today that you wanted to be sure to share with our audience?
No, I would encourage anybody that's listening. You can get the book on Amazon, or if you look up welldonebooks.com, just look for the book Well Done, 12 Biblical Business Principles that will build your business with kingdom impact. And if nothing else, my encouragement is to read that book, look at those principles, and begin to embrace them, because I believe they'll change your business and they'll change your life, because you'll hear the words well done all throughout your life and for all eternity. So thank you very much. I've enjoyed this. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, thank you. And I will make this offer to our listeners here. If you want a copy of Well Done, contact me. I will get you one. No worries. So let me know. Any of our audience members, I'll make sure you get a copy of that. So again, great time. Before we close out, I want to invite you and ask if you're willing to do something we call our rapid fire questions. So Ken, these are 7 questions kind of out of the blue. You have no idea what we're going to ask. Are you up to the challenge of rapid fire?
I am looking forward to it.
Good. Well, Scott and I will alternate asking. You want to ask the first question, Scott?
Sure. Ken, is there any product or service you have recently acquired that was a real game changer for you?
Well, that's a great question. Product or service, probably my Remarkable.
Oh, yeah.
The Remarkable tablet. I really enjoy that because we can put the executive guide on it, but it's a fun place to take notes and it can keep them all digitally. So instead of a bunch of notebooks, it's one place for me to keep all my notes.
You are probably our third guest that was their answer to that question. So good one. Second question, do you prefer the top or bottom half of a bagel?
I prefer the bottom half.
Do you?
We used to did pizzas on the bagel.
Oh, yeah.
And so that always reminds me of those little pizza bagels that we used to.
Oh, that's cool. Interesting. See, I'm a top half of the bagel guy because usually that's where all the good stuff is at, all the tasty stuff. I get those cinnamon crunch bagels at Panera. Yeah, I shouldn't touch those, but anyway. Okay.
Ken, I'm with you. I'm a bottom half guy. If you had to eat a crayon, Ken, what color crayon would you choose to eat?
Probably blue, because reminds me of the sky, and our picture of well done and finishing is when we go to heaven. So it reminds me of what our future might be and where I'll be one day.
Beautiful. Fourth question. You're trying to survive a zombie apocalypse. Imagine that. What one person do you definitely want to have on your team?
My wife.
There you go.
We're a great team, and man, you don't want to see her when she's angry. So I've tried to avoid that all my life, right? So probably those zombies would make her angry, but we'd be able to work together. So absolutely.
The mama bear comes out, I guess, huh?
Here's a quick one for you, Ken. Pineapple on pizza, good or bad?
Bad. I like regular pizza. Meat lovers with lots of sauce.
Very good. Next question. Name a couple of folks who, through their writing, have had a big impact on you.
Well, obviously, the Bible is a big one. Actually, I love books that are over 100 years old. And we have a few guides that are designed around that. And I say there are 10 business books that every leader should read, and they're all over 100 years old. One of those is P.T. Barnum's book called 40 Years of Struggles and Triumphs that was written in the 1800s. And so I love that book. Henry Ford wrote a book called Today and Tomorrow. Booker T. Washington wrote a book called Up from Slavery. Those are all powerful books that shaped my life. And my father actually introduced me to a couple of those books. And I just love them because they're real authentic. They're real, but not typical books that you hear and not books that you'll study in business school. But I think they're probably pretty essential to every business leader. And they happen to be all Christian, by the way. J.C. Penney wrote the one exception to that is J.C. Penney wrote a book in 1950 called 50 Years with the Golden Rule. And that is a book I highly recommend as well, because he talks about, and J.C. Penney went on to develop the largest department store ever in America, and business that's been in existence over 100 years. He started his first store in the early 1907, I believe, and out in Wyoming, and called it the Golden Rule Store. And then that's where that book came to be. So those are some authors that you don't typically hear very often. I've got great author friends too. John Gordon is great, and Chris Widner, and there's a lot of great guys. John Maxwell, of course, but I like those books that have been around for a long time.
Good stuff.
All right, last one, Ken. At the end of your days, what do you hope to be remembered for?
That's easy. Well done. If you say anything about me more than anything, I want to hear in the last day and for all eternity the words "well done." When they're walking around my funeral, I want them to say, "Well done. He did it. He did what he was supposed to do on this earth." And so that's the two words that mean the most to me.
Awesome. Beautiful. Well, Ken, thank you again. This has been a real pleasure. I've greatly enjoyed this conversation. For folks who want to get in touch with you or perhaps learn more about the CEO experience, how can they do that?
Yeah, you can go to our website at www.ceoexperience.com, the two words CEO and experience together.com. You can also go to, for our peer retreats, we have the website ceoretreatday.com. And then I'm on social media. Most likely find me on LinkedIn is a good place to find me. But my name is pretty unique, so if you just search Ken Gosnell, I'll probably pop up.
Very good. Well, thank you. This has been a pleasure. Greatly enjoyed it.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Did we all get in our challenge words? Scott, I know you got yours in.
Got mine in early. Yeah, flowers and sky. Flowers and sky.
You worked it in well. I managed to work in silver lining at one point. Ken, did you work in toilet paper? Did you do it so well I didn't catch it?
I did.
Wow.
I did.
Oh, my goodness.
I said our guides are like toilet paper, or the stuff we write's like toilet paper.
Yeah, that is right. That is the mark of excellence when you work it in and no one even catches it. So kudos to you. That's awesome. Thank you again so much, Ken. This has been
it did hurt a little bit when I had to say my guide is like toilet paper. But
anything to work in that challenge word, though. Well, thank you again. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it. Hey, good work. I've watched many of your podcasts, and they're just excellent. So please keep up the great work.
Thank you. Well, and thank you to our audience for tuning into this very special episode of Construction Disruption with Ken Gosnell of CEO Experience. Please watch for future episodes of our podcast. Don't forget to leave a review. We always have great guests, just like Ken. But until the next time we're together, keep on disrupting and challenging things. Look for better ways of doing things. And most importantly, don't forget to have a positive impact on everyone you encounter. Make them smile, encourage them. So God bless and take care. This is Isaiah Industries signing off until the next episode of Construction Disruption.
This podcast is produced by Isaiah Industries, manufacturer of specialty metal roofing and other building products.